Everyone, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate you all taking a little bit of time out of your Tuesday to come and visit us as we talk a little bit about BEC, business email compromise, and O365, making sense of all the noise. Now, let me first issue a little bit of a disclaimer for those deeper folks on the phone here. We will briefly mention the magic unicorn artifact, but I am not here to solve the unicorn artifact problem. Those of you who know what I mean, you know what I mean. Those of you who don't, save yourself the headache. Just understand that in both the forensic community, as well as more recently inside of the business community, this has been one of the most talked about and largest attack surfaces that we're ever going to see. So I wanted to issue that out on the surface. What I want everyone here for today is to talk about a few things. Number one, I want to talk about how these attacks are taking place. We're going to talk about the old way as well as the new way. Then I want to get right to the heart of things, and I want to tell you how you can start defending yourself now. Some of you may already have some of these defense mechanisms in place. Awesome. If so, you're likely not going to fall victim. However, some of you, and unfortunately there's a lot of businesses out there that do need to understand how they can protect themselves against these. And then lastly, I'd like to introduce a brand new tool for everyone to use as well. And I'll talk about Olaf, one of my recent labors of love, if you will, a little bit later on in the presentation. But I'm super excited to present that to everyone today. And I'm really happy that I get to now share it out because it's a framework that I've been using for a little while. So I hope others will get use out of it as well. But like I said, I want today's webcast to be about what these attacks are, how they take place, and more importantly, how you can defend yourself against them as well. And we're going to take a look at some various mechanisms here. First, let's jump into the particular attacks. So there's a few different high-level categories here. I went and grabbed the top 5 lists right off of the IC3. This is from their May 2017 list. We're going to talk about the updates to this list in just a moment here. But essentially, when you have a BEC attack, number one, you obviously have a business involved in it in some way, shape, or form. Number two, there's usually some sort of compromise that takes place via email. Now, let me just go on the record and say this. We are not talking about skilled advanced attackers. We are not talking about nation-state groups whatsoever. We are talking about groups that take credentials, they log into an email inbox, they go through and perform a couple searches, they do a little bit of profiling and detailing of your organization, and then they use that knowledge against you. Unfortunately, whilst they're not maybe the most technically skilled attackers, they are quite skilled at understanding how money moves through an organization and exploiting that particular routine. So that's the first thing I want to throw out about these attacks here. This is not something that you can go buy a 0-day exploit prevention device for whatsoever. This is not something that you need to go and spend a whole bunch of money on some sort of detection device. What you need to think about instead is how can I prevent my people from falling for phishes, and how can I prevent someone from understanding the flow of money inside of my organization. But these attacks have a few high-level categories about them. Bogus invoices typically involves some supplier or external company sending a bogus invoice with maybe banking details changed or something. You can take a guess that this is likely not a legitimate email from someone in the third-party accounting department. Business executives requests. We're going to see an example of this one in just a moment. This is one of the most common and oldest techniques of BEC. Without a doubt, this is where our attackers have had some of the most success. We're going to look at an example of that, as I said, in just a moment. Fraudulent correspondence, executive attorney impersonation, I think fall into somewhat of a similar category where, again, we're sending correspondence back and forth that is fraudulent in nature. We're pretending to be someone who we're not. Our attackers are taking advantage of people we would expect to see emails from. And then last but not least, we're also seeing these attacks spin off into data theft. And we're going to talk about why that happens when we get into attacker access and what they do once they're inside some of these inboxes. There's a 6th category here, which I don't have written down, but we will talk about in just a moment here, which is unfortunately falling into real estate fraud. Now, this could fall into any one of these categories depending on how the fraud is orchestrated. So that's kind of number one. These different types of categories are definitely extensible. You can have a fraudulent correspondence lead to a business executive request. These are not mutually exclusive attacks whatsoever. This is another area where our attackers unfortunately do show a little bit of skill. Is they have the ability to utilize some of these different types of attacks to pivot off of what people are expecting to see in their inboxes. And again, we're going to talk about ways to defend and protect against that. Now, some of you may be thinking, seriously? After everything you just described, this seems like some of the most elementary and basic attacks I could think of. And I'll be completely honest with you. As an incident responder, I spend a lot of time chasing down attackers who have weaponized very, very recent exploits. They're taking advantage of systems with high security controls in place. We see attackers jump through hoops on firewalls, take over networking devices, do all of these amazing things to compromise their networks. However, these guys are just sending emails. And for some of you at the security stance, you may be thinking to yourself, this is easy to defend. Phishing is really easy. Here's how successful BEC is. As of an article published within the past week, these particular attackers over the course of 5 years have stolen approximately $12.5 billion around the world. That's an approximation. Number could be higher, could be a little bit lower. But I've personally seen businesses file for bankruptcy as a result of these attacks. I've personally watched someone walk half of a year's revenue out the door without the ability to stop it, falling victim to these attacks. So yes, there is a lot of malware out there, which is awesome to investigate. But if we really want to start making a difference, let's solve the attacks that are bringing businesses to their knees, that are bringing people, unfortunately, to shutter their doors because they just can't deal with the amount of money that's out the door. $12.5 billion over 5 years averages to somewhere in the vicinity of $7.36 million a day. $7.36 million a day, and that's according, again, to the IC3 article published within the past week. If you want to talk to me about attacks at scale, you want to talk to me about attacker success, I'm going to say the group that's sitting on upwards of 10 or more billion dollars in cash over only 5 years worth of work as a pretty successful group. As a security industry, we can't afford to underestimate the power with which these guys wield, because unfortunately, as we all know, more money means more troops, more soldiers, more training, more tech, more capabilities. So whilst we are looking at very low level attacks, there's nothing to say these guys couldn't quickly escalate, because it's easy to make assumptions about what our attackers did and do, not off of what they can do. So let's talk about the old method for these BECs. The old method, unfortunately, was very, very straightforward and simple, but still worked out very well. Basically, you need a couple of things for this old method. You need a business, smaller businesses, but when I say smaller, I'm still talking about maybe hundreds of thousands or millions in revenue. But that doesn't mean that companies in the hundreds of millions and billions were exempt. They've fallen victim to this as well. But a lot of the cases that you see hit by these were typically within those smaller sized businesses, not necessarily your mom and pops, again, still victims, but your smaller sized ones. And you needed a couple things that could easily be picked off of LinkedIn. You needed a CEO name, a CFO name, if those positions even existed. We know some organizations, there's one person that wears all those hats, whatever it may be. We need those names. I'm also going to need an incorrect domain. Now, this also, as some of you may have known, refers to as a transposed domain or a misspelled domain or something of that nature. There are companies out there that actually offer monitoring services to keep an eye on some of these things for you. When I say an incorrect domain, I'm thinking about transposing two different letters. Maybe instead of abc.com, I'll do acb.com. Maybe instead of the word Hill, H-I-L-L, maybe I'll do H-I-I-L or H-L-L-L. Something that's going to look like something that's going to look like the text that people are expected to see. And the reason why this transposition works is because of the final piece of this cake, which is some random person in accounting who really is A, not paying attention to email, and B, does not want to piss anyone in accounting off. And here's an example of one of those emails for you to look at. Now, I'll give you a moment to look through this one. Some of you are probably gravitating right towards what's wrong with this thing. And some of these things are pretty easy to see and point out. Let's talk about what, unfortunately, some of the things we've got to pick up on here. Number one, if you're paying attention to the email headers, you may have noticed that the email where this actually came from is not the email that it should have originated from. Jane Doe exists inside of Acme ABC, not Acme ACB. Again, I'm using Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote organization names here. There's another thing as well. I'm sending this email, or my attackers are sending this email, if you will, right before 5 o'clock on a Friday. They're making an assumption that whoever's receiving this email probably doesn't really want to deal with this. They likely want to go home. They want to get on with their day. But here's where else my attackers dropped in a little bit of skill. Everyone here who's ever received an email knows what a forward looks like. Now, there are some emails that complicate this because they will carry through images and HTML and all sort of formatting from message to message to message. But if you send an email in a chain long enough, and I know some of you are going to laugh at what I'm saying here, all formatting goes away. All text goes away. Oh, sorry, not text, sorry, formatting and style. It just becomes plain text. And our attackers would construct their emails to look just plain text, because that's, again, what our users would expect to see. They're skilled at taking advantage of what you'd expect to see in your inbox. And that is not an actual forward. That's just formatted text, formatted font, set up in a certain way to look like an actual forward there. But here's what that executive impersonation email looks like. The CEO sends an email to the CFO. And then in that email, they say, hey, I forgot to pay vendor XYZ. Here's the wiring instructions. This needs to be done tonight. The attackers send this to our accountant to make it look like it's actually being sent from Jane Doe. This is basic stuff. Really, really simple email being sent through. And our accountant receives this. What are they going to do at Friday at 5 p.m.? The CEO has already indicated this needs to be done today. It's being forwarded from the CFO. That's a typical email chain they'd expect to see. Is my accountant going to halt everything on a Friday, call the CEO up on the golf course, assuming his plane has landed on the ground already, and is going to say, hey, I got this email. Can you please verify this transfer for me? Typically, no. They're going to go through and execute this transfer. The other thing that the attackers have done, typically with emails like this, is they've picked amounts at the very beginning that don't seem necessarily too suspicious. Now, that does not hold true for every single attack. Sometimes they go right for the jugular. However, for this particular one here, and notice this example is a little old, but this example, they started out with about $115,000. For this business, not that big of a deal to transfer that much money in a day. Again, tens of millions in revenue, supplier payments, employee payments, so on and so forth. It's not irregular to have that much money going out the door. But what my attackers are actually doing is they're building a profile, and they're finding a level of success. And they found it with organizations. And guess what happens? When you find that there's water at the well, you keep coming back again and again and again. And that's unfortunately what our attackers did, is they would come back after these organizations. But guess what? That method is not sustainable because, number one, well, you're going to run out of companies eventually. You're going to run out of people who are going to fall to this, so you would think. Number two, we started to come out with external email notification. So if I send you something from an external domain to an internal email, I can take an email app and I can append some sort of text on there that's going to alert you that this is coming from an external party. If I'm expecting an email from the CEO to the CFO to my accounting team or to my comptroller, and to my controller, and that particular email has an external flag on it, boom, I'm going to get caught in the process. So our attackers had to find a way around that. So here's what they started doing instead. And we're going to call this the new method. Now, your miles may vary in your investigations and in your organizations, but my attackers identify email addresses to a company, and they spray out to that particular organization. Good old-fashioned spray and pray. Let's spray out a bunch of phishing links and hope someone clicks. Let's hope they do. Sure enough, someone's going to click because someone wants to know, what is that encrypted document that you're trying to send me? What is this thing being sent my way? What is my possibility of winning a cruise? What is my possibility of having a brand new Facebook account? How dare someone talk about me and I don't know about them? I'm going to click on this notification. Whatever happens, my attackers find a target and they get a successful click. And when they get that first click, they know they've got someone who's going to click on emails. This is their first step into this particular organization. They compromise the company, compromise the individual, usually with something along the lines like a DocuSign phish. This is one of the more common techniques lately because everyone, again, we're thinking about our attackers here, taking advantage of human nature. Everyone here says encrypt all of your documentation. Don't send that in plain text. Password protected. Share file, DocuSign, all of these different services give you the ability to transfer documents securely. So if I receive an email that says open your encrypted securely transferred document, I'm immediately going to assume this thing is safe. Again, my attackers are preying off of human nature. The phish comes through, and when they double click on that link, they're usually presented with a login page like this. Now, some of you may have seen these pages before, but I promise you, you won't find it at Microsoft. I promise you, this is a pretty crazy login page. This is your first indicator inside of your organization to tell people something is wrong. Because when I go access OneDrive, the amount of options I got here look a little funky. But nonetheless, our users click in. We're going to talk about this page a little bit later on. So hang tight if you want another screenshot of it. Once my attackers get in, they get that first compromised company. Then they say, I need to compromise other companies because now they're in. And here's what's changed between this and the old method. They now own an inbox, and that inbox is going to have recipients who are expecting or who are going to trust emails from it. So here's how the attackers beat the EXT, or the external flag, on the email. You make external okay. You just make it from someone that they expect to see. So at this point, my attacker, illustrated here by the little orange man, takes their target and starts to search through their mailbox. And they start to go through, and first thing they're going to do is implement some mailbox rules. And they're going to look for those mailbox rules, and what they're going to do is they're going to drop in a rule that is going to do one of two things. They're either going to forward the inbox to a Gmail or some sort of public service that they own, or they're going to drop in rules that delete messages from their upcoming target list. And then from that compromised box, they're now going to fish further. So if you want to think about this in classic attacker architecture, the first gold person to the left side of this screen here, that's your compromised user. That is now your attacker's jump point. They are now using an inbox as a jump point to execute this particular attack. And then you keep wash, rinse, and repeating these rules as far as you need to go through the chain. You take every target that clicks, every target that you compromise, you search for more targets, and you continue through. This is how our attackers are able to average as much money as they can, get all steal all the profits that they've stolen thus far, because they continue to spider through inboxes. As I said earlier, they've gotten rid of that external distrust by taking advantage of what people are looking for. Let's talk about that now, though. Let's talk about jumping, using my compromised inbox as my jump point. Let's talk about jumping to a third party now. Let's talk about jumping into a compromised inbox. Once I'm inside of that third party company, my attacker's next step is to very skillfully understand the flow of money. And they'll start doing really, really easy searches. Because guess what your inbox is optimized for? Searching through the history of your emails. So they'll do this in one of two ways. They'll connect to that inbox either via Outlook Web Access or Outlook.com or some sort of web service, or they'll sync it into Outlook. They'll do one of those two things. Doesn't matter. They need a way to search through it. We've seen them use Thunderbird. We've seen them use Firefox. We've seen them use all different types of connection methods. It doesn't matter. They get to a search bar and they start to search for words like wire and payment and things like that. And once they figure out the flow of money, they then go target that person. And they target that person. And they keep going further and further and further. As I said, these attacks are not necessarily linear. There's no reason they can't go back a step, spray again, get the right people. Go back a step, spray the right people, keep going, so on and so forth. They keep going until they figure out the flow of money. They figure out the individual in the organization who is expecting to receive an email that says, transfer this money from here to here. That's what they're expecting to see. That's part of their daily job. And then all my attackers have to do is from one hop to another, send that expected transfer through. And once again, this is where they display their skill set. They can send that transfer request internally. I can say from Alice to Bob. Let's say Bob is my payment processor guy. Bob is the one who receives all of the invoices. Bob is the one who processes all of the transfers. He only processes transfers that come from Alice. Well, that's okay. My attacker owns Alice's inbox. So they'll just craft a fake email, send it to Bob. Bob trusts Alice. Bob sends the email out. Done and done. Or my attackers will go back to the old techniques. Let's say Bob does not care where the email comes from. But what Bob does care is that the invoice or the transfer requests are in the correct form. Not a problem. My attackers have had access to Alice's inbox for a month. They know what the forms look like. They know their Word documents. They know that they're PDFs. They know that they're in Excel. They know what fields need to be formed out. Remember, they spent time understanding the flow of money inside of your organization. They take advantage of that. They fill out the invoice form correctly. So that gives them the opportunity to then email externally. This type of attack also allows them to proficiently execute vendor transfers, because if I know the person who's expecting vendor receipts or vendor invoices, then I can send them a request. I can hit a company a couple times a day if I want. And I've seen organizations unfortunately fall to attacks that repetitive. I'll send one from the inside that says transfer money out to a bank in China, and I'll send another one from an external vendor that says transfer money to a bank in North Carolina. Hey, Bob is processing 20, 25, 30, 100 payments in a day. What's another 2? Doesn't make a difference to him. Unfortunately, this is where they've achieved that level of success. Let's talk a little bit about the code behind what's happening here. So at this point, I think we've established pretty well that my attackers have the ability to very, very successfully impersonate emails, take over email accounts, move laterally through an organization, use one account to move to the other. The more and more I describe this, the more and more they sound like an advanced attacker. I mean, imagine reading a report. The attackers established a jump point inside of the organization. They used this jump point to subsequently compromise additional organizations within the trusted network or the trusted group or inside of that industry. That sounds like something you'd read in an APT report really easily. But here's where we can draw a line and a difference between these two. These guys are doing it with very, very low-tech code and very, very low-tech techniques as well. Here's an example of a particular server which the attackers had compromised at one point. I don't know if this thing is still up. Go ahead and try, because the last time I checked, there was a list of targets inside of it, and there was also a list of files inside of them as well. They leave these folders, they leave these web servers open. Again, we're not talking about skilled OPSEC here. We're talking about very, very easy to read, easy to see code. They leave the entire framework for how to steal O365 credentials out in the wild. They leave all of this visible for anyone to get into and anyone to see. And here's what some of that code looks like. This is how straightforward this particular type of attack is. Enter your email at the top part. Guess what? You're done. You're finished. There's even a little message, a little comment in here that says, that's it, finished. Straightforward. Steal O365 credentials, code's already done for me. All I need to do is prop up a server. Here's something I don't have a screenshot of in here. They also reuse SSL certificates. Remember, breaking user barriers. Another user barrier is making sure that little green lock shows up in your web browser when you're going through and doing analysis, when you're going through and reading email, or when you're going and viewing external sites. As a user, let's put 2 and 2 together. I received an email that says I should go open an encrypted document. Okay, I received it from Alice. Alice is a trusted friend of mine. And the site that I go to is HTTPS. I get the little green lock. Everything's encrypted. Unfortunately, a lot of people inside of information security have started to associate encrypted with safe. Encrypted means I can't sniff a packet and without minimal work view what it is you're seeing. It does not mean that the traffic inside of that packet is necessarily safe. And unfortunately, my attackers once again take advantage of that as well. But they'll reuse their SSL certs. I'll have a cert for one site. That cert will get used from site to site to site to site to site until expiration. They'll reuse the text inside of their phishing emails as well. Also built inside of their code is really, really simple, easy lookups like password stealing. There's a really, really straightforward password technique. I've also got user geolocation. User geolocation allows my attackers to assess that the person who's entered the password is in the right location, is in the right area you'd expect them to be. There's also, and I don't have this one listed inside of this presentation, they also have blacklists hard-coded into these web apps as well. They have blacklists associated with IP ranges that are associated with known security vendors. That's right. If you're in a top 80 security vendor right now, there's a chance that you're not going to be able to hit these from your public IP space or from your VPN IP, because they've likely got a copy of those as well. Again, we're talking about low-tech attacks, but these guys read their logs. They read their user profiles. They read their IP addresses, and they build the attack out dynamically. They also like to add a little bit of metadata to their password stealing techniques as well. We get things like, this is a particular Wells Fargo login. So I'm going to drop in my geo IP location, drop in my IP information, country, hostname, browser, username, password, account summary details. The attacker is just making it super easy to go and steal these credentials, to go and steal this data as they get through there. All this code couples together, gets sent out in an email every time someone logs in, and it just keeps flowing and flowing and flowing, because we're not doing the checks where we need to be checking. We're not looking at the data where we need to be looking at the data. Unfortunately, my attackers continue to steal these credentials, and they do so via very simple low-tech forms. We'll talk about how to educate our users in just a moment here. We've taken a look at some of their code, very straightforward. We've talked about some of the attacks. Some of you in information security right now, I know, are saying this is easy to defend. This is low tech stuff. I'm going to remind you, $12.5 billion over a little over 5 years. It's still successful. It still works. Let's talk about how to fix this. Number one, there is a typical flow that gets associated with these particular transfers. My employer receives some sort of an email, transfer details. Regardless of what happened all the way before that email was received, they finally receive something with transfer details. They initiate that transfer and the money goes out the door. As far as I'm concerned, there are two different areas where we can start to focus in our organizations to fix this. Number one, the difference between, or sorry, not difference, but the distance between my employee receiving an email and my employee initiating a transfer is your first corporate choke point. That is the first place where your employees need to start questioning what they're doing. And I'm going to talk about what you should be questioning here in just a moment. But this is the first choke point here where I want your organizations to start thinking about, how do I start to defend against these? I do so by making my employees get double signatures, making my employees get double verification, voice verification, whatever it may be. The amount of money walking out the door, if the transfer you're about to initiate is large enough to cripple your company if it was actually stolen, there needs to be some sort of verification wrapped around that. Let's talk about the second part here. Between initiating the transfer and the money actually going out the door, there's choke points here as well. Now, I'm not talking about the banks. We're not talking about offloading the responsibility of these attacks to the banks, because that's not their role. The bank's job is to facilitate and help move money. Although I'm going to give the banks a lot of credit. They've done a fantastic job in assisting a lot of organizations with this problem. A lot of money gets returned back, which is very, very good to see. But the responsibility to solve this problem is not on the banks. It's on your organization. So that distance between initiating the transfer and the ACH transfer actually taking place is another opportunity for your organization to implement more controls, implement more verifications, implement some sort of technique or method that makes sure that someone else puts eyes on this thing. Because let me tell you how we beat the attackers based on the attack scenario we just walked through. Your attackers do a very good job of understanding how how money flows through your organization digitally. What your attacker can't do is understand Bob going back to Alice and verifying transactions personally, one-to-one, over a phone call or in person. They can't deal with that technique. They can't put in an email, don't bother about coming by the desk, Bob, I approve this one already, although they will definitely try. So put mechanisms in place that allow you and your organization to pause when this type of stuff happens. And ask yourself simple questions like this. Do you guys work here? Do you do any work in Nigeria? If you don't work here, why are your people logging in from here? We're going to talk about that in just a moment. We're going to talk about enabling logging here. But that's the first thing I'd be asking. Do I actually work in this particular country? How about this? Throw this question to your finance department. In the history of all the years that we've been doing business, do we actually ever send money in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of quantity over to banks in China? If the answer to that is no, then your controllers or your accountants or your CFOs or whomever's first question should be, why on earth are we starting today? The best mechanism I see to detect and defend against these particular frauds here is to make sure your accounting department is vigilant. They're asking questions about money transfers. Because I promise you, as a CEO, as a CFO, as a C-suite member, as someone who has the ultimate say in all this kind of stuff, yes, it can get mildly annoying to have every single transaction verified. But I promise you, having to double check a transaction with your team is not as bad as potentially losing the ability to operate because you have no more working capital. So I'm asking you, please start to think about ways to defend yourself. Put your accounting department under stronger scrutiny when it comes to their particular transactions. Let's talk about logging in. How easy is it for your organization to be accessed? Email, SharePoint, O365, whatever it is, start thinking about how easy it is for your business to be accessed from someone outside of the web. If all I need to do to get into your organization is single-factor authentication, and single-factor authentication opens up a world of documents and emails to me, it's time to fix that. Everyone, I'm going to say a very, very unpopular opinion right now about two-factor auth. I don't care how annoying two-factor auth is. Enable the darn thing. If you need any proof as to why two-factor auth is necessarily crucial or important here, go and read an indictment that was released by the DOJ last week, and we'll talk a little bit about email fraud and what it can eventually lead to. Implement two-factor. It's doable, it's free, it's easy to drop in. You can drop it in via O365. You can also get a third-party vendor to help you with it as well. Again, I pose the exact same question to you. Would you rather type in a 6-digit code every time you need to access your email outside of a normal method, such as the browser? Or would you rather lose all of your operating capital? Obviously, we need to up our security a little bit here. All right, analysts, InfoSec folks, this is my shout out to you. This is where you get to work at defending your organization a little bit better as well. First thing you need to go do right now is log into your O365 instance, and you need to enable audit logging. We're going to get to the Microsoft announcement in just a moment here. This is not turned on by default, or at least let me rephrase that. The parts that are turned on by default are useless. They don't give you the level of detail that you need. But there's a problem with me suggesting this to all of you. The problem with me suggesting to turn on audit logging, unfortunately, means you're expecting a compromise to happen and you need a way to investigate it. So I want you to focus on those other things first. That's why this is the last piece. This is not a forensic investigation webcast. This is a start defending yourself webcast. Go to your O365 portals, enable O365 logging just in case. We enable it by actually going to the search and investigations tab inside of the admin console. And we turn on audit logging. That gives me the ability to search through dozens and dozens of operations inside of O365. We're going to look at these in just a moment here. Quick note, this audit log is so crucial to security that Microsoft actually announced last week that this is going to be enabled for all commercial organizations via a slow rollout, but everyone will have it turned on by end of year. You know what? Thank you, Microsoft, for doing an awesome job in helping us protect ourselves against these particular attacks. To those of you running O365, do not wait. Go turn this thing on now. I promise you, if you find yourself in a sticky situation, this may or may not be the difference between getting your money back. So go turn this thing on, have the ability to log. I've got a link inside of the webcast here that you can use to go turn it on. So grab a copy of the webcast after this presentation and feel free to take a read through and figure out a way to turn this on in your organization. Go to Google and search TechNet O365 Compliance Center. Turn on audit logging. Find a way to turn these on, because unfortunately, if you find yourself in an investigation, you're going to need these logs to understand what happened and what took place. Without them, we're reaching for a light switch in the dark. We may never, ever find it. If you've got these logs enabled, let's talk about how to analyze them. There's one key thing that we can look for in our logs. And now there's multiples. I'm showing one in particular here. One of the things we can start to look for is impossible logins. Impossible logins is a good way to pivot off of how quickly can your users move from point A to point B. My users have the ability to log in from lots of different places. Yes, I can sit behind a VPN if I want to and change my IP address and potentially change my geolocation. But it's very, very tough for an average user who has legitimate traffic, the average user who is accessing their website or accessing their email from the same IP addresses, from the same geolocation every single day of the year, to all of a sudden hop across the Atlantic Ocean and log in from Lagos, Nigeria in 5 minutes. So the first thing we can look for, and some of you may see impossible logins. Some people also talk about this as geolocation velocity or IP velocity. This is how quickly my IP addresses and my logins are changing geolocation. This is kind of tip number one, if you will. Search number two, look for Nigeria. Again, we're talking about people who understand human nature, not people who have the best OPSEC. If you fall victim to one of these attacks, I've yet to find an investigation that does not involve at least one IP from Nigeria. We're not talking about rigid OPSEC infrastructure here. But you know what? I don't want to sit here and give you a bunch of example techniques all day long. I want to give you a tool that actually does all this for you. And my final part of today's webcast, everyone, is going to be a release of a tool I like to call OLAF. For those of you who are Disney fans, you probably already have an idea of what OLAF looks like in your head. Believe it or not, this actually was inspired by the Disney movie. I was talking out loud at breakfast one day, to myself, if you will. My 3-year-old daughter was sitting next to me, and I was talking about O365 logs. And she said to me, Daddy, are you talking about Olaf logs? Because you heard O, and to her, O means the character Olaf. And I thought to myself, I'm not, but man, that would be an awesome name if that worked out. So sure enough, I found a way to make it work. Olaf, the Office 365 log analysis framework. And I have to thank Mark Parsons for the quote, because logs like warm hugs too. So here we are with an amazing framework, but I unfortunately don't have millions of dollars worth of lawyers at my behold, so this is not the official logo. Olaf is actually a copywritten character that belongs, of course, to Disney. So I had to take Olaf out, but we're going to stick with the name. Olaf, the Office 365 log analysis framework. I got a link in here for you. I'm going to show a couple screenshots of what Olaf is able to do, but first and foremost, this is an organic repository because I wrote a release for the repository 2 days ago. And then an individual in the UK, who I'll mention in just a moment here, released a blog post on Sunday, which completely upgraded all of the tools that I had. So this is an organic collection of the code, the tips, the techniques, the log analysis frameworks, the scripts, of everything that I've come across in my investigations. So some of it, yes, is going to be copies and pointers to the folks other people have so generously put together and open sourced for us. Other parts are going to be my personal take on analyzing these logs available for you to do analysis. My goal upon the release of this, and during this presentation, I've got a timed GitHub conversion. This repo should now be public for you all to take a look at. My goal with this repository and with this framework, or with this tool, if you will, is for you to be able to take O365 logs and find compromise within seconds. I want you to be able to make these investigations so easy, clean cut, and clear that my attackers don't get a chance to go to transaction 2, 3, or N plus whatever. I want to catch these guys faster, stop this money flowing out the door. There's a few things I've got inside of Olaf here. So Olaf is a set of tools and visualizations to help you in capturing, number one, and number two, analyzing Office 365 logs. There are PowerShell-based log collection scripts. You can also export from the GUI. We're going to talk about this in just a moment here. There are also Python-based parsers to allow you to parse and enrich the data and get it right back out to text if you want to ingest in whatever format you want. There's also tools to get those O365 logs directly into an ELK stack. I know some of you are using various types of SIMs and capabilities. There's no reason you couldn't pipe these logs in directly, but I like to enrich my data a little bit. Here's the other thing. This is the very first time I've said the word exchange. O365 is not limited to Exchange. It involves other things like SharePoint and Word apps and Teams and other Microsoft applications. I'm not writing a framework to analyze one particular application. My attackers are going to find ways to pivot inside of this environment. We're going to find ways to analyze it. How do I ingest data in Olaf? We can export our web logs directly from, I can export my audit logs directly from the web console. There are also scripts inside of Olaf that you can use to pull from PowerShell. Some of the scripts I've written and used myself, others we've been fortunate enough to receive from other folks, or they've been published on TechNet. Again, this is serving as a collective repository. Credit is given where appropriate. There's a couple ways to ingest. If you want to use your own ELK stack, there's a couple ways you can ingest. Number one, I've given you a Logstash config. You can point to a particular folder and just stream event logs in there and be done, and it will automatically ingest them for you. I've also given you a Python ingestion script that will allow you to take 1, 2, 10, 100, 1,000, I don't care, static files and enrich and ingest to your server of choice. So there's a couple different ways you can pivot through this data depending on how you investigate here. Remember, I'm trying to appeal to folks to augment the way they investigate, not change the way you investigate, because we need to start catching these guys. Each one of these ingestion methods has data enrichment, data normalization, and if it's possible for me to do correlation, we do that correlation as well. Not all of the data can be done via correlation, but we make it happen. Here's an example dashboard that you're going to get, and these dashboards are available for you to log in as well. When I load a dashboard inside of Elastic, there's a couple things I want to look for. Immediately, I want to look for countries doing things. So I start out there with a geo map. Then I also want to look at the different operations. Elastic gives me a beautiful tag cloud to make that super easy. And I'll zoom in on those two parts right here. My geolocation map, as well as my tag cloud. Let me get right to the business of finding out who's doing what. And I can zero in on a particular country, and my entire dashboard becomes responsive to that as well. I'm also going to bring you right to the data sets that you should care about. Remember I talked about those attackers dropping rules in? I want that data right up front. I also talked about attackers forwarding entire inboxes. That particular operation is called set mailbox. I want that detail right up front as well. I want all my evidence of potential compromise right up front, because guess how often these things happen in legitimate environments by legitimate users? Infrequently enough that you will find evil in these two tabs the first time you load this dashboard up. I'm also going to want to pivot really simply and look for every single piece of activity that's coming out of Nigeria. Bear with me. I think I just lost my PowerPoint. Hang tight, everyone. I'm going to bring that back up in just a moment here. It's funny, we're talking about O365. I guess someone heard what I was saying and decided to pause there.
Well, in the meantime, I'll let everyone know if you have any questions, you can send them to q@sans.org.
Thanks, Carol. I am coming right back up here with PowerPoint. We should be back here in just a second.
Yeah, right, you're on the way. Looks good.
All right. Are we back? We're back. All right, perfect. Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. I'm sitting here talking about Microsoft and how great they're doing, and then PowerPoint crashes on me in the back end. It's bound to happen. The third part of this dashboard that you're going to get access to is obviously all traffic or all log activity coming out of Nigeria as well. Because that's the other thing that I want to pivot off of, is I want to find those countries that I don't do business with, and I want to bring their data immediately to the forefront as well. This dashboard has yet to fail helping me find evidence of BEC compromise in an environment. And I hope it does the exact same thing for you. But that's the visualization sense. I also want to make it easy for you all to go and collect this data as well. So I've called and pulled together, and a huge prop to Adam, who I'll mention in just a moment here. I've also gone and called together a significant number of PowerShell scripts that I've also included in this repository. And this is really credit to the beautiful world out there of PowerShell developers, because there are folks who have made some amazing things. Now, let's talk about that unicorn artifact, everyone. There was an artifact that was lauded for a long time inside of the digital forensic community that would essentially provide all the details of what attackers had done left, right, and center when they had access into a particular inbox or access to an environment. There were some companies that made business models based off of this API. There were some companies who wanted to make business models off this API. There was a lot of decisions and assumptions made off this API as well. Unfortunately, the access to this API has been changed. And unfortunately, some of the things are not the way they used to be. But that does not mean that we as investigators or we as security researchers are left in the dark, because there are other ways to find what we're looking for. And here's an example. And again, this script's in the repository. There actually is a way in your environment to enable settings to determine if messages have been opened and read by your users. There are ways to enable these particular settings. Go through, read the PowerShell, see how the script is implemented, turn the settings on in your environment. If you are interested in this level of detail in your messages, then make sure you understand how to implement them correctly. Don't base off of documentation-less APIs that you may or may not fully understand what's happening inside of them. Here's my investigative disclaimer when we talk about that activities API. Just because something is available today does not mean it's available tomorrow. O365 is one of the most organic platforms I've ever had the privilege of working with or having an account inside. For that reason, Microsoft updates and changes things daily. What is available today may not be available tomorrow. So for the love of God, please do not base forensic court findings off of something that I cannot reproduce or something that you may not be able to verify at a later date and time. The default to features documented by Microsoft is to go research TechNet and see what they've mentioned, see what they've talked about. There are other APIs out there that will give you a lot of the same amount of data. Some of them you're going to find inside of the OLAF repo that's now public. There are other ways to get access to this data. So I'm not going to talk any longer about the activities API. Instead, I'm going to throw the challenge out to the D4 community to go and replicate those same exact results using documented, maintained, supported, going to be around for a while APIs. And if you really want to leg up, learn PowerShell. You're going to get better results interacting with your O365 instance that way. You're going to get significantly more data points. You're going to be able to enrich on the fly. You're going to be able to download on the fly, ingest on the fly, work with on the fly, and investigate on the fly. So that's my throw out. That's my challenge there. But as I mentioned, OAuth is now publicly available. I encourage folks to use it. I hopefully hope that it makes investigations easier for some of you, gets you to the data faster, gets you more insight into what you're examining, gives you the ability to analyze these logs in a faster way. I know a lot of you already have these logs ingested into your SIM. Look for ways that we're enriching, look for ways that we're correlating. Maybe we can make your SIM more powerful that way as well. But with that, everyone, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. There's an awesome list of references. The gentleman from the UK I kept referring to was Adam Harrison. Adam put up a blog post literally 2 days ago, which does an awesome job of correlating a lot of the same PowerShell code that I had originally called for this presentation as well. So Adam, huge credit to you. And I'm going to ask folks to go read Adam's blog instead of waiting for me to give you a lot of PowerShell screenshots, because Adam did an awesome job of pulling a lot of this together. Huge props to CrowdStrike for a great investigative report on BEC actors originating out of Nigeria. And then also the IC3 for keeping all of us updated. They're the ones who have given us updates year by year in some periodic fashion that let us know just how successful these guys are. So with that, everyone, thank you all very much. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about, as Carol mentioned, we do have an email, q@sans.org, or you can reach out to me on Twitter, mbromley, or at mbromley, DFIR. There is also, of course, the OAuth repository, which I'll happily accept issues for, look into code fixes for, or anything of that nature. So I'm looking forward to collaborating with all of you. Best of luck in BEC investigations. The best wish I can hope for any of this is let's cause some serious headaches for these guys, stop the flow of money going out the door, protect our organizations, and make that one less attack we have to deal with on a daily basis. Carol, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Matt, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.